Right then, this is social change, and this is for Friday's lesson, and this is all about how minorities can cause big changes in the whole of society. So it's how it goes from a small minority, that might even be just a few people, and if they work in the right kind of way, they can cause the whole, it can spread and spread until finally they're the minority and you can have changes in law and so on. So, as part of this, what we're going to look at are various examples. So I'll talk through some in this video, but at the end of your workbook, you'll find I've put information about a number of different examples. Some positive, some negative. So, for example, the suffragettes, the African American civil rights movement, gay rights, those are obviously fairly positive examples, and then the Nazis is an example where again a few people started and it grew and so on, that was not so positive. So that's what we're going to be looking at, and as part of this week's preparation, what I need you to do is actually read that information, and I'll tell you a bit more about that at the end of this. So I'm not going to be talking about evaluation in this particular video. I'm just going to talk you through the knowledge part of it and get you to do a little bit of application at home, or at least some background reading. That means you're a little bit more informed, because if you're like I was at your age, you probably don't know a whole lot about some of these historical examples, although you might do through history. This might be Lucy's topic. So what we're going to do is start off by looking at the process of social change. So we're going to look at 6 things, and they tend to happen roughly in this order. So first of all, the small minority draw attention to whatever the problem or the issue is. They need to be consistent. We've already looked at that in minority influence. They need to cause the majority to think more deeply about the issue. That's called deeper processing. Then what happens is, and this is a bit like commitment, something called the Augmentation Principle, where if people carry on campaigning for their issue despite risk to themselves, that can be persuasive. Then you've got the Snowball Effect, where enough people have been converted that it snowballs and becomes the majority. And the last thing is social crypto-amnesia, where people agree with the cause because they've forgotten where it originally came from. So let me talk through those in a little bit more detail. The first thing is drawing attention to the problem. So this often happens through marches and protests and so on. And this is actually a picture of one of the first African American rallies for civil rights, and it's about drawing attention to the fact that there's segregation and that not everyone is happy with that. And then all the members of the minority must be consistent for them to have an effect. We've looked at that already. This is just a reminder. They need to have synchronic consistency, where they say the same thing, and diachronic consistency, where they're saying the same thing over time. So then the third thing that needs to happen is those people who previously were okay with the issue, they start to think about it. Like, for example, with gay rights, there would have been a lot of people who just never really thought about it, the fact that there wasn't marriage for gay people, and they actually just didn't think about it, so they accepted the status quo. And these, the fact that you've got this minority campaigning and being consistent over time causes them to think more deeply about it and think, well, actually, no, that's not very fair, for example. And then another thing that needs to happen, this is called the Augmentation Principle. And I put the definition here because it's a little bit woolly in your textbook. And what it is the tendency to attach greater importance to a potential cause of behaviour, in this case like the protest marches and the campaigning, if that behaviour occurs despite the presence of other inhibitory causes. So what that means, basically, if people are campaigning for an issue and they're then persecuted in some way because they're campaigning for it, and they still carry on campaigning and pushing the issue despite the risk to themselves, That's called the Augmentation Principle when people do that. So I've put a few examples here for you. This is the what's mentioned in your textbook, the Freedom Riders, and this was a group of mixed race people when the civil rights movement was going on, and they went onto buses in areas where basically where the law wasn't backing up the fact once it had changed that you were allowed to travel in segregated sorry, got muddled there. This is a group of mixed race people, so some black and some white, going onto buses deliberately to challenge the law or challenge the local customs, and that often ended in violence. And this is one example. So they were putting themselves at risk for the sake of campaigning for people to be allowed to go on buses, different race people to go on the same buses. And here, this is the suffragettes. The suffragettes were arrested, put in prison, and force-fed, and they still carried on campaigning. And obviously that then went up to Emily Wilding Davis throwing herself in front of the king's horse and dying. So that was another example of this. And then here is this is early Christianity, this picture. And it's not a photo, obviously. It's Nero, the emperor at the time, was not keen on Christians and had loads of them burnt alive and thrown to the lions and things, and yet they carried on spreading its message, and they're obviously in a very big majority today. So there's 3 examples where people have carried on behaving in a certain way where even though there's inhibitory causes, i.e. they're being persecuted in some way, and that lends a lot of weight to their message. And then what we've got here, this is the 5th process, and it's the snowball effect. So eventually, once they start to gain a few people, and a few more, and a few more, and as they gain more and more people, it basically snowballs. So you get to a point of a kind of tipping point where there's no going back. And because there are so many people, it then becomes the majority rather than the minority. So that's the snowball effect. And here's the last process, is social cryptoamnesia. So this is where you forget about the source of the original idea. Often the original source may be where the original people that start campaigning, they're viewed as quite radical, not my kind of person. You know, I'm sure looking at this particular picture, this, when you think about gay rights, maybe is not what you think about. This is one of the original gay rights marches, and you know, a lot of people would be quite put off by that because, you know, they're quite different looking and radical, and they're kind of viewed as the outcasts or the weirdos. Whereas when we think of gay rights, we maybe have more of this kind of a picture in mind, and it's a lot more, you know, a lot of people would be more likely to lend their support to the idea of gay marriage with this kind of picture in mind. It's my kind of person. I'm not associating myself with this weird crowd of people. You know, you forget about, so the idea where you forget about the source of the original idea, and you're therefore more able to accept it. So those are our 6 processes that we go through with social change. And what I'd like you to do as your preparation for this week's lesson is basically read through the examples I've put in the back of your book, because this is a topic where you might get an evaluation question. It's hard to predict with the new spec. Certainly with the old spec, you are far more likely to be asked to explain like an example and explain the processes that you saw, the different processes that are happening to cause social change. So we will do the evaluation in the lesson, but I want to focus a little more on application with this particular preparation task. So I'd like you to read the examples. I'd like you to pick one that you're really interested in. So there's likely to be one maybe that you already know a little bit more about, or that one that sparks your interest a bit more. I'd like you to choose that and do a bit more research about it, thinking particularly about those 6 processes we've talked about, and maybe how you can see them. Or if you think that maybe they're not happening, like why has this minority been successful maybe despite the fact? Or maybe there are other reasons that you think were more important for them being successful. So it's a bit of an open-ended topic, you know. I'm giving you a bit of, it's really up to you how much or little you put into it, but I would, as much as you can would be great. So at the start of next lesson, what we'll do is each of you can say which topic you've picked, and we'll just talk through kind of what you think their main successes were and why they were able to affect social change. Okay?